that whole sense of paying attention to the people I'm talking to really comes from, I think, the lessons that I learned even as a child from my mother. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you.
Mm-hmm.
The words of Jesus, we call it the golden rule, but it is the greatest single message that I think's ever been presented in terms of human relationships.
What would you do if the very first day on your job, you arrived at the door and found the door nailed shut? That's exactly right. Nailed shut. Be a serious message, wouldn't it? Well, in this session of Inspiring Courageous Faith, we've got a guest who's experienced that firsthand. He has been married to Janet since 1974. They have 3 children, 7 grandkids, and was the governor of Arkansas for over 11 years. In fact, at one point, you were the longest office holder? No?
Oh, almost. Orville Faubus had 12. Bill Clinton had just under 12, and I had right at 11.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
I was close, you know.
But who's
probably there won't be another one that long because term limits have now come into play. And I had the unusual circumstance of coming in really almost at the beginning of a previous governor's term and then being reelected twice. So unless something unusual happened, nobody will end up serving that long.
That's exactly right. You're a candidate for the president of the United States of America twice. He plays bass at the worship team of Christ Community Church here in Little Rock and greets all of us who come to church on Sunday morning as a member of the parking team, which I really appreciate.
Well, it was the only thing the pastor thought that I might could do and not mess up. So he said, can you wear a yellow vest and go out and park cars? And we've only had a few accidents, no major injuries in the parking lot since I've started parking them, but I love it.
You're very dignified out there, though. I just love the look. I really do.
It's the vest. That's what does it.
It does. Mike was recently appointed by the President of the United States to become the United States ambassador to Israel. And what I want to know, Mike, what was the look on Janet's face when you told her of that phone call?
Well, it was not a look that I got to see because she was in Oklahoma on a Samaritan's Purse deployment. She's one of their volunteers, and she travels literally all over the world for Samaritan's Purse when there's a disaster. She causes some of them, but this one she didn't cause. She's actually there to help clean it up. But she was in Oklahoma helping people who had a tornado. And so I get the call, and I'll have to tell you about how that came about because that was really bizarre. So I had to quickly call her before it went public. And so I called her and I told her, and she's in the middle of taking assessments down from people whose houses have been blown away. And I think she got blown away because we were totally taken off guard by the whole thing.
So you weren't expecting it?
No. In fact, I had not talked to President Trump about it, had not lobbied him for it. There had been some people who had told me that they suggested that he pick me, but I blew it off and didn't think about it. The only conversation I really had was to tell him I really wasn't that interested in a federal job because I didn't want to be babysitter to a bureaucracy in D.C., didn't want to go oil the machinery of some bloated agency. And I'm living a pretty good life. I was enjoying what I do. But this was the one thing and the only thing for which he could have called me that I would have had what I call the Isaiah moment. Here am I, Lord, send me. Because of all of the history that I have had with Israel going back to the July of 1973. So I'll give you a little insight because this was, again, totally a God thing. I just finished a staff meeting for my television show. We'd been on a conference call. 15 minutes later, I'm at my desk working at my computer. The phone rings. I never answer a call when I don't know who's on it. If it's a number I don't recognize,
Got it.
I just don't answer it because I figure if it's important, they'll leave a message. If it's some reporter, I don't want to talk to him. And I'm not interested in an extended car warranty right now. So, I just don't answer calls. If it's in my directory, the name will show up and I'll answer it.
Sure.
Unless it's Dennis Rainey, and then I'll say,
of course.
way. Anyway, this call comes in. I don't recognize the number. Normally, I would have just hit silent and that'd have been it. Something told me, and only believers sensitive to the Spirit will understand what I'm saying. Something said, answer this call. Don't know why. I just felt answer this call. So I answered the call. President Trump was on the line. And he said, I want you to be ambassador to Israel. Just that quick. Of course, he gets into it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
He's not Southern. He doesn't spend 20 minutes engaging in the conversation.
I had not noticed that. I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah, well, he's not. Great guy and a lot of fun. But anyway, so he gets right to it and tells me that, he wants me to take on this job as ambassador to Israel. And I'm a little just stunned because I was not expecting the invitation to do it. I was not expecting the phone call. And I even kind of thought that if he did anything, it might be to call and say, would you be interested? Or that some staffer would call and ask me, if he asked you, would you say yes?
Sure.
So I said, well, is this going to be announced anytime soon? He said, well, I want to give you time to talk to your family. 30 minutes later, it's all over Fox News and it's international released. Within half an hour of that, Benjamin Netanyahu is on the phone to me, congratulating me. I've known him for over 30 years, so long-time friendship with him. Get a call from the foreign minister, from the former ambassador of Israel to the U.S. I barely was able to get the call into Janet, pull her off a job site long enough to say, well, you might want to get home when you can because we may be going to Jerusalem.
We're moving.
Yeah. Quite a shock.
You have been to Israel how many times?
Probably 100. I'm sure at least that.
You've taken tours to the Holy Land.
Tens of thousands of people over the course of the last 40-something years I've taken on tours. Before COVID, I was going 4 or 5 times a year, not all taking groups. Some of it was for speaking engagements in business and different things. But I would go to Israel multiple times a year over the past many, many years. Built a lot of friendships, relationships with people in business and a lot of people in government. I know a couple of dozen Knesset members, a lot of mayors. As I say, I've known the prime minister over 30 years before he was prime minister. And, it's a place I'm very comfortable because I've been there so much. And yet I never thought that this was going to shake out and happen.
Well, when I heard, I had 2 thoughts. Number one, I thought, brilliant, because I didn't know how many times you'd been, but I knew you'd been a lot.
Yeah.
And I knew you had connections over there. I didn't know you were buddies with Netanyahu. I figured you knew him pretty well. But anyway, the second thought I had was, I thought this was brilliant because of your character. And I'm not blowing smoke at this point. You've heard me say this, but I spoke at your inauguration when you were actually, I prayed. You didn't trust me enough for me to speak. You only wanted me to address God, be accountable. But anyway, I've known you a long time, and I've lived in the state of Arkansas since 76. I've never heard a negative word about you. Now, that may speak who my friends are, okay?
Must be good people.
Really good people, huh? But I just thought, you're going to make it through. I mean, if you don't make it through the Senate, then it's like there's been a hostile takeover over there. So here was the question I was so looking forward to asking you. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 20, it says, we are ambassadors for Christ. He's given us a mission to preach the greatest Redeemer, the only Redeemer the world needs at this hour. And undoubtedly, your concept of being an ambassador has all of a sudden changed a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the key to understanding what an ambassador is, both biblically as well as diplomatically, is that you do not carry your own message. You are the messenger of your government. In the case of an ambassador for Christ, it's not that you go and tell everybody what you think. You present God's word as God has given it to you. So your job is to take his message, not yours.
Right.
In the same way, an ambassador for a country takes the message of his or her country and his or her leaders, and your job is to convey that and to be the representative in person when the entire country can't show up. So it's a really wonderful kind of concept, and it gives you a sense of responsibility because you're not just a freelancer out there saying whatever you want. You're tied to the message and the policy of your country. In the case of a diplomatic ambassador, in the case of Christ, you're not a freelancer either.
No,
you don't get to just go out and say what you think God should be doing. You better speak with some level of authority, and the message has to come from him. It just can't come from your thoughts and whims. I
found in looking up that passage something that has been in my Bible for a long time, but I hadn't read it recently. And it says, I get to be God's agent in his global work.
Wow. That's great. So you wrote that down in the margins.
Years ago, I wrote that down. And I guess my question to you is, why don't you think more followers of Christ embrace being an ambassador, that office, and taking it serious as they step out of their embassy, their home, into the world with the message, the greatest message that's ever been proclaimed?
Maybe they don't fully embrace and understand what it means. To be appointed as an ambassador is an incredible sense of trust because you're entrusted with that message. It's like you've been given something that doesn't belong to you. You have to be a good steward of it. You have to present it as it was presented. That's, to me, the real key of being an ambassador. You can say the right words, but say them in the wrong spirit, in the wrong way, and you've not said the right words. It has to be not only the text, but it has to be the context. So if a believer is going to be an ambassador for Christ, it's not just simply going and telling somebody the difference between heaven and hell. It's doing it with the Spirit of Christ.
Yes.
And carrying that same attitude and heart, because otherwise it could be very cold and indifferent, and God is not cold and indifferent.
Well, I traveled the state with you on more than one occasion way back when you introduced covenant marriage into the state of Arkansas. And I marveled at how when you met people throughout the state, you, unlike any person I'd ever seen, was face-to-face, eye-to-eye, every time, no matter who they were, child, elderly person, didn't matter, rich or poor. And I thought, you've been trained to be a great ambassador for America, but even more so for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.
Well, I pray I will be. That whole sense of paying attention to the people I'm talking to really comes from, I think, the lessons that I learned even as a child from my mother. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Mm-hmm. The words of Jesus, we call it the Golden Rule, but it is the greatest single message that I think's ever been presented in terms of human relationships. How do you deal with people? Just treat them like you want them to treat you. You want somebody to hit you? No, don't hit them. You want somebody to steal from you? No, then don't steal from anybody. You want someone to lie to you? Of course not. Don't lie to anyone. Life gets real simple when that becomes the foundation of your human relationships.
I recently had that conversation with one of my grandchildren. They were hitting.
Yes.
And I went, hold it, time out. I want to go back early in your marriage when Janet was diagnosed with spinal cancer.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. But she thought at one point she might be paralyzed. At another point, might never be able to have children. How did that grow your faith in God? And you didn't become bitter as you doubted whether or not he's in charge or not.
Well, there was a struggle. I would be dishonest if I didn't say that when the diagnosis first came, we were barely married a year. We got married just short of our 19th birthdays. So we were still 18. By the time we were 20, she'd been dealing for several months with what the doctors had initially diagnosed as a slip disc, Well, it wasn't a slip disc. Turns out that when they did a myelogram test, they discovered there was no disc that was messed up. She had a tumor in the canal of her spine, which was a very obviously serious kind of situation, because if it's in the canal of your spine, it's sitting there on top of your spinal cord. And that cuts off the nerve center from the mid-lower part of her back. And the first prognosis was, we're not sure it's operable. And if not, all we can do is try to make her comfortable. And that was kind of the initial sit on the edge of the bed and tell you the bad news. So the doctor said, we're afraid that if we try to surgically remove it, to remove the tumor, it will sever the spinal cord and she'll be paraplegic for the rest of her life. But he said that's the option, is at least to attempt. So obviously that was a better option than just standing by and watching her die. But he was very honest with us. The doctor, I'll never forget Dr. Thomas Fletcher, a renowned neurosurgeon here in Arkansas. He was the most compassionate and sensitive person. He could see we were just a couple of kids still in college. And this is not supposed to be happening to you when you're that age.
Right.
And he was very patient with us and answered all of our questions. But to be honest, I went through a period of really struggling. It's like, why us, God? I mean, there are people out selling drugs on elementary school campuses.
Right. Evil people. Right.
Yeah, we're trying to live for you, do the right thing,
right.
Be faithful to you. Why us? Because you really do. You know, the old saying is, the book was written, why do bad things happen to good people?
Right.
And I think that I thought it many times, I need to write the book, why do good things happen to bad people? Because that's what we really think about, isn't it?
It is.
How come good things are happening to bad people and bad things are happening to good people? But truth is, none of us are good. We're all in this world and we're sinners. We live in a broken world and we're broken people. But it was also through that experience that I had to learn that God did not forsake us, nor did he author the evil that was in her body. We live in a world, and that world has all kinds of risk and issues. We did not know how this was going to turn out. And when you come to the place in prayer, when you quit saying, God, let it turn out like this, because that's the prayer that you start with. Certainly I
right,
did.
Of course.
Lord, here's the way we got this figured out. Now just make sure you get in on our plan, because here's our plan and we're going to present it to you, because you may not have one, but we got one. Let it be this. And I even thought God wanted it to be an instant healing, something miraculous that would be so fantastic that we could go around and give the testimony of, there she was laying in the hospital bed, given up for death. And then all of a sudden we prayed and it all got great. It didn't happen like that. And you kind of wonder, how come? In retrospect, part of the reason is because that would be a one in a million situation. Most people will never have that instant, everything's turned out great. What they do have is months, if not years, of surgery, radiation or chemo, rehabilitation, and years of rebuilding strength and life. That's what people experience almost exclusively in this real world of ours. So if we had some instant healing, it'd be a great story to get up on the stage and tell.
Right.
But most people will never be able to relate to that. I came to really understand 2 Corinthians chapter 1, that we comfort others with the same comfort wherewith we have been comforted. Mm-hmm. If we've not been comforted in those things, we can't comfort others. I cannot tell you how many times over the past almost 50 years now that I have encountered someone who's been given that diagnosis that your spouse has cancer or that you have cancer. And I could say, well, just pray and it'll be gone. But it's a lot more powerful to put your arm around a person and don't try to, preach to them and give them any platitudes. Just hug them, cry with them, and say, it may be a while. And you may not understand where this is going. I can't tell you where it's going because I don't know. but you'll never go alone. And that's the one thing that you can give them comfort in. So I realize, looking back, that the answer to the prayer that I was certainly praying, I think Janet too, wasn't what I was asking for, but it really was better than what I asked for, because it built in us a deeper sense
Exactly.
that faith is not getting what you want when you want it. Faith is trusting God when you do not get what you want and when you want it. But when you can trust God in the worst of times and when He's not following your plan, that's real faith. That's discipleship. If you get immediately what you want, you get used to it and you get spoiled by it and you start thinking that it's always going to be like that. Life is tough. It's hard. Lots of tough choices, but a lot of things happen to our lives we didn't choose and we didn't cause. This is important that people understand, because there's always that person, like it was in the time of Jesus. Whose sin was it that this boy was blind?
Yeah.
Was it his parents' sin or was it his sin? And Jesus said neither. It was to the glory of God. Did He meant that blindness was a glory? No. He meant that in the midst of what really was a tragedy, God could bring glory.
Exactly.
But it wasn't that there was a cause. And we're so, and I think Americans are worse than most of the world. We have to see everything, cause and effect, cause and effect. What's the reason? What's the excuse? Sometimes there isn't one. This is life. It's hard. Now, how do we handle it? That's what faith does.
It is hard, and there are unanswered questions.
And there will be for the rest of our lives.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll never forget going to a memorial service of a little girl, I forget her age, maybe 11, 12, who'd just been to Northwest Arkansas to a swim meet and was on her way back on a brand new interstate from Northwest Arkansas to Central Arkansas. And a car on the other side of the road had a cat in it with a teenage driver, and the cat jumped in the teenage driver's lap, and the teenage driver cut across the median and hit the car with the mother and this young girl, and she was killed instantly.
Oh, my.
And her dad, who's a physician here locally, I'll never forget this. He stood up and he said, "I refuse to ask the question why until I can ask it of the one who can answer it."
Wow.
No answers here.
Yeah.
Clearly. But there is one who knows what He's doing, and it's not us. We are not in control.
And sometimes I had to come to the place where I realized I'm not mature enough spiritually to get the answer. It may be in heaven before I'm mature enough to be able to even understand it. So I can ask it. And one of the things that I did learn, it's okay to be angry at God. Now, let me explain that, because I think sometimes people will say,
Sure.
"Ooh, how dare you?" God knows our hearts. So if we're really upset with Him and we're struggling with that, one of the most powerful things is to let it go. Be honest with Him, because He already knows that we're thinking that and we're feeling it. So it's not like I can't tell God that. He might be upset with me.
He can handle it.
He already knows, and He can handle it. He's handled worse.
Yeah.
But it's therapeutic to get honest with oneself and not try to pretend that I'm doing just fine. I'm just loving Jesus through all this. Because sometimes you're hurting so much that you're just wanting to shake your fist at God and ask Him why. And sometimes it's the only and the best thing to do. And He may not give you the answer, because it may be, as it was, I think, in my case, there were things I wasn't ready to hear. I didn't want to hear it right then. Maybe later, maybe in eternity. But the point is, when you get to the place where you quit praying that God will do X, and you really come to the same prayer as it was in Gethsemane, not my will, but thine be done, that's when the release comes. That's when healing comes. It doesn't mean that it's going to turn out easy or better. Jesus still went to the cross. He still died an excruciating death. But I've often said we hear sermons about how that the battle was won on the cross. That's not true. The battle was won in Gethsemane. That's where the real fight came. The surrender in Gethsemane was where it was settled. The cross simply was the culmination of that journey, but it was already determined that he was going to willingly take my sins upon himself to the cross.
Jesus said, "Not my will, but thine be done."
Mm-hmm.
And that is ultimately what's taking place.
Yeah.
I didn't know that story when I asked you to spend some time with us on Inspiring Courageous Faith, but that really may be the reason for this podcast being aired. But there is a story I want you to tell that you said a lot of things over the years that have impressed me, but this story, I don't know, it just hit me that it's so needed today for people to hear this story. So you'd been a student at seminary. Mm-hmm. You got out of seminary and you took a pastorate. I think you were in your mid-20s, maybe early 20s. There's Janet, you're not new bride, but still wet behind the ears like you. You took a church in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and you had a young man who came to you wanting to be baptized. Yeah. And you told me this story when I asked you the question, what is the most courageous thing you've ever done in all your life? And I've rerun this many times. I'm going, think of all the experiences Mike has had in his life as leading a state, the government, people, catastrophes, things that you've handled with grace and dignity. I couldn't wait to hear your answer, and I don't think our listeners are I think they're going to benefit immeasurably by hearing this story from you.
Well, this young man had been listening to our church on the radio, and he was 15 years old, and young African-American kid. And so he called and said, I was listening to you, and you talked about coming to Jesus, and I want to do that. Can I come talk to you? Absolutely. So he did. We sat, we prayed, we talked. He trusted Christ, and he said, I want to be baptized. And I said, well, of course you should. And keep in mind, this was an old, 100-year-old church in one of the most maybe racially segregated towns left in Arkansas, and a very white church in a very segregated town for the most part. And he said, I want to be baptized. I said, absolutely. So I realized this was going to be, quite a moment for this church to have a young African-American kid coming forward to be baptized. And I knew that there were some people in that church that would absolutely have a stroke, that this church was about to be integrated. There was racism, and not pervasive, but
right.
Within a handful of people, it was very real. So when he came forward, I stood before the church and I put my arm around him in the front and I said, folks, young man, his name was Curtis, and I said, he's come, presenting himself to trust Christ and wants to be baptized, and I'm so thrilled he's here. And I said, if there's anyone here that has any issue with it, then I would just say to you that I would never be a part of a church that wouldn't welcome Curtis into our congregation. Because if we would, for any reason, not welcome Curtis, we've turned Jesus away. So Curtis, we're glad you're here. And I want everybody just to affirm with me how grateful we are.
I love it.
There were 7 old men that got up, stood up right then and there, walked out of the church. A couple of them called me, said they wanted to meet with me. So I met them at a restaurant a couple of days later. They made it very clear to me that they were going to get me fired. They were going to wreck the finances of the church. They would see to it that, that I would be very sorry for what I had done. And I said, gentlemen, do what you got to do. I did what I had to do. You do what you have to do. But in no way would I ever deny somebody the opportunity to be baptized after trusting Jesus. And I'm really disappointed that any of you think that a church should say, you're welcome, but you're not.
At the age of 20?
I was probably 26.
Okay.
Maybe 26, 25 or 26. I was young. It didn't occur to me that I was doing anything all that bold. I just thought, look, this is the way it has to be. I don't have a choice. I was fully prepared that I might get fired. But here's what happened. This was in June, which is normally a very bad time for finances in a church. Everybody's on vacation,
Right.
It's summertime and all. We had the largest offerings that month in the entire 100-year history of the church. In addition to that, we had more people coming that just suddenly started flooding without, it wasn't because of him. It was just God sort of saying, you just stand back, watch this. And then, I'll never forget this, we had an 80-year-old deacon, a wonderful old man, and before church, about 2 weeks after this, he said, I need to see you, Pastor. Okay, so we went in my office, and he just started crying. I can hardly tell this without choking up. He started crying. He looked at me. He said, I always wondered what I would do if a black person came to our church. And he'd been one of the guys, he'd been there his entire life, 80 years. And, was one of the pillars, stalwarts of the church. He wasn't one of the people that got up and left, because they left. I mean, they never came back, and for which that was wonderful. But he looked at me and he said, I always wondered what I would do or what I would feel if someone, came and they were black. He said, you know what I feel? I feel joy. And I'm just grateful. And I'm glad that he's in our church. It was like that this incredible dam broke and the water started flowing. And because of his testimony, that everyone looked up to him. And then he made that public. And it was just so powerful. And the church just experienced a breakthrough, real joy. I didn't know that's how it was going to turn out. I mean, I really thought it could split the church right down the middle. Maybe not even down the middle. It could go the other way, and I might be, looking for something to do. But that was fine. But I knew this: there was no way I was going to pastor a church that said to a 15-year-old kid, no matter what color he was, "You're not welcome here."
Right.
Because if that kid's not welcome, neither am I, and I won't be a part of it.
You've illustrated what courage is. Courage is doing your duty in the face of fear.
Yeah.
It's not the absence of fear.
Yeah, because that's stupidity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's naivete to say, oh, I don't have any fear at all. I mean, that's what young kids do when they do dumb things, right?
Right.
Jumping off something.
Yeah.
Riding their bikes over a ramp or something they built. When you don't have any fear, you're probably not thinking it through. So I agree with you. I think it is in the presence of fear. It's when you know what could happen, but you do it anyway.
What would you say was the primary thing that built your courage for that moment? Because that's a pivotal moment in a young pastor's life. You don't have years built up there. Yeah. You hadn't been there that long. What enabled you to do that at that point?
It goes back to what I said earlier. It's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, that was so ingrained into me that it just seemed that it was unconscionable to be a racist. It was unconscionable to say, I'm better than that person because of his pigmentation, or I'm better than that person because his socioeconomic standing. I grew up on the low end of the socioeconomic scale. So I grew up in virtual poverty, living in a little orange brick shotgun house on 2nd Street in Hope, Arkansas.
Right.
That my parents rented. So there was no sense of importance, but I knew what it was like to be looked down on because of where I lived and because of the way I had to grow up. And I guess part of it was I never wanted to make anyone else feel like I sometimes was made to feel because things that I had nothing to do with. And my parents were good providers. They loved me. They were strong people.
Right.
But they were doing the best they could with what they had, and they just didn't have much. So do I resent that? Absolutely not. I'm blessed to have grown up that way because it made me appreciate everything that would ever come in my life later on. But it does give you a sense of having a sense when you see other people who are mistreated, or you see them who are being made fun of or ridiculed. You know that feeling. You don't ever want to be anybody that would do that to another person.
I'm just thinking how that's going to serve you well in your new assignment, the Golden Rule.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to a tough area of the world that needs to hear the teachings of Jesus.
Well, it's where he grew up. It's where all those teachings came from, geographically.
Yeah.
And yet it'll be a new thing in some people's minds and hearts. I will be the first evangelical Christian believer to be the ambassador to Israel. And I find it very interesting, Dennis, that some of the most supportive statements have come from very strong Orthodox Jews, because they recognize that Christians in America are the strongest supporters of both the state of Israel and the Jewish people, more so than a lot of American Jews are. So that, at first I think, well, maybe they'll be uncomfortable with a Christian guy being the ambassador, but it's quite the opposite. I think they're ecstatic because they know that I don't have to love the Jewish people. I'm not Jewish. That gives them a sense of, hey, there's authenticity here. And if I were Jewish, they'd say, well, what is he going to do?
Of course.
What choice has he got?
Right.
You got to love the Jews. He's a Jew. I don't have to, but it's biblical conviction on my part that causes me to do it.
I don't want our listeners to miss what you just said. It's biblical conviction.
Yes.
Not biblical near beliefs.
Yeah.
But biblical non-core issues that I'm basing my life on. I'm surrendering.
I believe in the book. It's as simple as that. And I believe today what I believed when I was 18 years old, and maybe when I was 15 years old. I don't say that because I'm naive. I do tell people sometimes that I knew a lot more about Scripture, particularly the end times, when I was 18 than I do now. I knew everything then. The older I get, the dumber I've gotten. I'm not as sure about how everything pans out. I don't know. But I'm absolutely more confident than ever that His Word is the absolute 100% inerrant, infallible, inspired truth. And I stand on that. So if the Scripture says it, I don't argue with it. I may not fully comprehend, understand, or even apply it, but by golly, I believe that it is the one truth. It's the tuning fork to which I tune my life, just like I tune a guitar to the tuner, because it's fixed and rigid. My life is not. So you don't make the instrument tune to what you think, feel, or believe. You tune your life to that which is forever rigid and fixed.
And the author of that book can be trusted.
Yeah.
He can be trusted.
I had an interesting conversation with a good Jewish friend of mine probably 15 years ago. We were in Israel together, and he's a Jewish medical doctor from New York, and I was the only goyim on the trip. Everybody else was Jewish, so they had invited me to go. And he pulled me aside and he says, help me understand something. Why is it that evangelical Christians are so supportive of Israel? And he was not being accusative. He really didn't understand. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, it's pretty simple. I said, you can be a Jew and have nothing whatsoever to do with me as a Christian. You don't need me to be a Jew. Your faith is totally locked in with what you believe. I, on the other hand, cannot be a Christian without the foundation of everything you stand on, because all of the prophecies that lead me to the Messiah, all that I believe is built on the Jewish faith, and my Messiah is a Jew. So I got no choice. You can do without me. I cannot do without you. He said, okay, I get that.
There was another incident in your life that I referred to at the beginning of this podcast, where you arrived at work to find the door of your office nailed shut from the inside.
Yeah.
And the reason I know about this is because I'd called you and said, let's have lunch. And I didn't know what had happened. And so I arrive at the Capitol, and I'm looking for the lieutenant governor's office, and I find it, and you can't get in.
Yeah.
And tell them what happened.
Well, while I was down being sworn in, the Secretary of State, who was in charge of the buildings at the Capitol, had his men go in from the inside and nail the door shut to my office so I couldn't get in. Interestingly, one of the few staffers I had left her purse in the office, and they had to let her go around the back to get her purse out because it had been nailed shut inside as well. So I come back from getting sworn in, having just been made the lieutenant governor, and found out that the office is unattainable for me. And later I found it was almost probably 30 years later, a couple of years ago, I found out that the person who ordered that was Webb Hubbell, who was at the White House at the time. Bill Clinton had hired him to go to Washington with him. And they were so angry that I won this special election for lieutenant governor because they didn't think that was possible. And it was an embarrassment to first year of Bill Clinton's presidency that a Republican who never got elected anything in Arkansas, Republicans didn't get elected. I was only the fourth in history, that I would end up winning that election over his personally chosen candidate, who was his former chief legal counsel. So it was sort of like, well, you can't stop the election, but we can make it so that he wished he hadn't come. And so he told the Secretary of State, look, let's just make it miserable for him. So that's what they did. They nailed the door shut. It stayed nailed shut for 59 days.
And you did what days. I thought was one of the most shrewd moves I've ever seen anybody make. I came to your office, which was
a converted vault. It was an old vault.
Actually, it was a janitor's.
Kind of a closet, yeah.
Janitor's closet.
And we set up a little makeshift office in it, and I put an easel out front that said every day, 12 days, door nailed shut, 13 days, and it became like the papers, and everybody kept covering the fact that the person had been elected lieutenant governor but was kept out of his office because of the people at the Capitol who were angry he was there. Well, this is a classic Genesis 50 moment, which I think we have a lot of them in our lives, but where what was intended for harm, God used for good. This was not done to help me. Best thing that ever happened to me politically, because even people that did not vote for me and would never have voted for me said to themselves, this is just wrong. I didn't vote for the guy, but he won, and he deserves the same office that the guy before him had. And so what turned into almost a martyrdom, and a year later I had to run for re-election because this had been a special election. I won with the largest number of votes that any Republican in the history of the state had ever received, because it had just totally turned it around. And that would not have happened having barely squeaked through in that first race. But because of that, it made it so that people gave me a chance and were willing to say, let's let him be lieutenant governor.
And what men meant for evil, God meant for good, because a few months later, where was your office in the Capitol?
A few months later, it was in the governor's office because the governor got convicted of Whitewater-related felonies, was forced to resign. I was moved up to the office of governor and stayed there for just under 11 years. I
mean, can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
You can't make it up. Well, I have to ask this question. You've operated for the past, 30 years in this arena, political arena?
32 years, 33 years, yeah.
How have you been able to do that and be Teflon clean?
I'm not sure how Teflon clean I am. I have my moments. But I tell you, when people ask me sometimes, is it really hard to be a believer in politics? And they expect me to say, oh, yes, very difficult, very difficult. And I'd say, no, it's actually much easier. And here's what I mean by that. I don't wake up every day and look at an opinion poll at the front page of the paper or the editorial section to know what I believe today, or to know what I need to think or what I need to say. I have convictions. I know what they are. They may cause me to lose votes. They may not cause me to win any. It may cost me friends rather than gain me friends. but I'm comfortable being who I am and the person that I think God wants me to be. I'm not always that person as perfectly as I'd like to be, but I know who I am, and I have a confidence that one day my judgment is not going to be made by the editorial board of the New York Times. It's going to be made by the Father on high. He knows more about me than they'll ever know. He will judge me more correctly, but he will welcome me into his kingdom because of the blood of Christ on my life.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know what? Take your best shot, do what you got to do. But for me, 100 years from now, it is not going to matter what somebody else thinks.
Yeah. And I'm looking for a question that a friend told me to ask you. What is the most important lesson about courage you try to instill in those you mentor? And how does your faith inform this guidance? It's a great question.
It is a great question. It would be to tell them, be who you are, that authenticity is more important than even authority. That what really sets a person apart is their authenticity. You may not be the person everybody wants you to be, but be the person you really are. You're not an actor. You are a gift of God. So don't be somebody that you wish you were. Be the person God made you to be. Mm-hmm. Get comfortable in that. And you'll be much more content than constantly trying to compare yourself to a person that you never will be. And I truly do believe that's a key.
Second question he had, which is similar to what you've already touched on, but I still am going to ask it. In today's polarized environment, how do you advise Christian leaders to courageously live out their faith while respecting those of different beliefs?
Be bold in what you believe and how you communicate it, but don't be obnoxious. I think that there's a time when it's easy to think that I'm being persecuted for my righteousness.
Right.
When the fact is I'm being persecuted because I'm a jerk. And there are a lot of people who say, oh, they really are persecuting me. It's for my stand for Jesus. No, you're an arrogant jerk. It has nothing to do with Jesus. So be careful not to ascribe certain attributes to oneself that really are not godly qualities.
What's on your reading shelf? What are the best 2 or 3 books around courageous leadership that you've ever read?
That I've ever read. Some books that really made a difference in my life. One that I read when I was 15 years old. And it's not a spiritual book, but it's a great book that I encourage people to read. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
It's very practical.
Right.
It's a great book. Francis Schaeffer's book on Whatever Happened to the Human Race, very powerful book. C.S. Lewis, The Problem of Pain. That was a very powerful book for me and instructive, especially when Janet and I were going through our issues with her cancer. I'm trying to think of another really key book that helped shape me mentally and philosophically. Chuck Colson's book, his story was one that was, to me, exceptional because it was a story about a person who had been to the heights of power, crushed to the lowest points of life, found the Lord, and had the best understanding of grace that probably I've ever heard.
Was that Loving God? Was that the name of that book?
No, this one was, it was the biography that he did, and I'm trying to remember the name of it.
Born Again.
Born Again. Yeah. Thank you. Born Again. Yeah. They made a movie of it, in fact.
Yeah. Well, as we conclude this podcast, I want to ask how people can pray for you and Janet as you begin your stint. I'm assuming the Senate will confirm you, and you'll take all the prayers that you can get.
I definitely will, and pray that the confirmation process will go smoothly and successfully. And then just pray that as we adjust to a completely different world in life, that we will represent not only our country, but our Christ. That's important. I think that we will be in a nation where he was born and lived and ministered, and that we will be able to minister, not just to serve, but to actually minister and be a witness in a positive, powerful way for hopefully bringing a new level of peace and opportunity in the Middle East that is desperately needed.
It really is. And when you were assigned this new position, I thought God's got a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
He really does. Yeah. I mean, a Gentile, evangelical believer, you said it, dropped right into a powder keg.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is going to be fun to watch how God uses you guys.
And it'll be a joy for me because I love the nation of Israel. I love the Jewish people. I really have a heart for what I'll be doing. And, I love the Arab people as well. It's not that I'm completely unaware of needs and issues that are there. So I want to be a bridge builder, but also being honest about how those bridges can be built and how they can't be built. So I think we have to sort of shelve some of the old diplomatic concepts and be very clear and honest about, look, if this land is the land that God gave to the Jewish people, can other people live there? Yes. But can they do so threatening to annihilate the people God put there? No.
Well, I want to encourage our viewers, pray for wisdom. And if you look in the Bible, the word wisdom is all over the pages, especially in the book of Proverbs. And wisdom is godly skill in everyday living.
Sorry about that.
In case you didn't know it, Mike loves guitars.
Yeah, so
he's got a whole room full of guitars. He just wanted us to know.
So my alarm is a guitar. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Anyway, God is the one who gives wisdom because He's the one who designed life to be lived according to His blueprints, the tuning fork, as Mike put earlier as we've talked. And I do want to ask you to pray for him and Janet and their family as they go. Pray for safety for them, for wisdom, for the wisdom to know how to, I don't say negotiate, but just be the love of Christ in the midst of some really tough situations. And I want to encourage our viewers to just look at your phone or iPad right now and click sign up to subscribe to Inspiring Courageous Faith, because that's why we're here. We're here to expose you to great men and women and hopefully inspire you to live out your Christian faith or find Jesus Christ. In fact, Mike, I think it'd be good because I felt like your pastoral heart has came out numerous times in this dialogue. I'd like you to just share with someone how they could come to know Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, and they would know where they would spend eternity. They wouldn't have to wonder. They would know.
Well, it's simple enough that I understood it at the age of 10. And it's coming to the place where you realize that we are sinners. It doesn't mean we've done horrible things. We're not serial killers necessarily, but we've broken God's law, the simple laws of God. We're not perfect. All of which we can admit we're not perfect. But to get to heaven, we got to be perfect. It's not that being good gets you into heaven. Got to be perfect. It's a perfect place. If we went there in our current condition, we'd mess the place up. So how can we be perfect? Well, we can't. But Jesus says, I'll cover it for you. I will be what you can't be. But you have to take your trust away from yourself and put it in me. He took all of our sins to the cross with him. The blood that was shed on the cross is blood that covers our sins, just like all the way back to the very first Passover. And that was the prophecy, the sign of what was to come. And now as we receive Christ as the redemption, as our as our substitute. He reconciles us to God.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes our perfection and guarantees that we will be with him in all eternity. So it's a simple matter. We don't have to pray a long prayer. It's just, God, I'm a sinner. Forgive me. I trust Jesus to cover my sins and to get me into heaven. He hears that and he answers.
Well, we've talked about being an ambassador, and I'm going to close with the passage we read earlier. Paul writes, "Therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you, on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake he was made to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." That truly is the good news.
It is.
Thanks for tuning in. And if you made that commitment, send us a note. Just click that subscribe, get in touch with us, and we'll try to put you in touch with some people locally that can help you. May God bless you. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Go to therainey's.org/podcast for more inspiring Courageous Faith content.